Hello, I'm Stefani Kostadinova, and I'll be presenting on the topic of language learning on steroids. That is what I call learning multiple languages at the same time. And I'm going to be starting off by just giving you a very quick idea of who I am and why I'm here. Because up until this year, actually, when it's my first year in the Polyglot gathering, I was very much a little bit an incognito polyglot. So I come from Bulgaria, and I grew up monolingual, and every language that I've acquired ever since has been a result of study. I think that there's a little bit of this stereotype about the Balkans as a very multilingual area, and they are, but that doesn't mean that we grew up with different languages. Actually, in my parents' generation is just mostly monolingual, and my generation is we were raised with Bulgarian. We pick up English because it's everywhere, and that's about it. So the way that I've been able to acquire most of my languages has been exactly through studying them at the same time. And I'm going to go over how in this talk. And I'm listing my social media here so that you can connect with me if you'd like. I know that there's the opportunity to ask questions at the end of the talk, but also I'm more than open to continue the conversation afterwards, which is why I'm sharing this. All right, so let's dive in. I'd like to go over several things here. I think that, well, first of all, it's a little bit of an unpopular opinion, I believe, especially if you see, usually the advice that is being pushed online is that it's a bad idea to learn several languages at the same time. Maybe some of you disagree as I do. So I'm going to go a little bit over those myths, why I think they're myths, and then I'm going to elaborate why I think it's good to study several languages at the same time, what my process is, give you a little bit of additional tips and tricks, and then I'm going to close with the importance of trial and error. That is the importance of kind of finding what works for you. All right, so I think some of the things that are very, very common and that we hear a lot are that you should not study multiple languages together if you are a beginner. So I think most of you in this gathering are already polyglots and like that wouldn't apply to you, but I also know that there are some people that are just interested in languages that are attending. So I'd really like to start with this one first, because whether it is for you or for the advice you give to beginners, I think it's important to know that it is not, nothing bad is going to happen to you if you study several languages at the same time. Your languages are not going to suffer. It's not going to be a disaster, even if you're a beginner. I believe that, of course, the muscle of language learning develops the more languages you speak. But if you're just starting out and you want to go for two, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. And it's very weird how sometimes we make up rules in language learning that we would never apply to other disciplines in life. Like if you want to do basketball and football, nobody's going to tell you don't do two sports at the same time. You're going to confuse your muscles. For some reason, we're being taught that in language learning. And I think that as long as you give both languages or, three or however many you study, right, enough airtime, then that's fine. And you can be a beginner, you cannot be, like whatever you are, I think can work as long as you follow some key steps that I'm going to go after in a bit. The second one that I see a lot is that you should not study closely related languages together. So the example is usually those from the same family. I had a lot of people tell me in the beginning that I should not study Spanish and Portuguese together, or like Spanish and Italian and that kind of stuff when I first started. To me, it's a little bit of a mystery. I don't understand why people say that, because mixing doesn't really happen only if you're studying languages of the same family. And I'm going to give an example from my own experience, because, well, when it comes to the neuroscience of multilingualism, there's so many unknowns. Most of the research is done on bilinguals, not on, multilinguals like us. And it's a little bit hard. And there's like so much that we still don't know about how the brain learns languages. So I think a lot of the times we have to rely on anecdotal evidence, unfortunately. But that being said, in my own experience, I studied German and English at school. And German much less than English, and really not much self-study, right? It was like I was 16 when I first found out like how to study languages by myself. Before that, I didn't even know that I could. I never tried. But my love for Spanish pushed me to do it. So anyways, what I wanted to say was like with German, I studied it at school. And then I just left it for 3 years. I did not touch German with a 10 football. And then one summer of my college life, I was on an internship in Germany, and I was in a store, and I wanted, to pay, and I was using my German, the kind of limited intermediate German that I had back then. It's still like that. And I was trying to pay, and I was saying, "Kann ich mit einer Karte pagen?" Which is just a disaster. Pagan, that's like taking the Spanish word pagar and then adding, taking its root, adding a German ending to it. I don't have no idea how I did that. Like two completely unrelated languages, and I didn't just mix words from them in the one sentence. I took, the root from one language and the ending of another. Complete disaster. So what I mean by that is that it can happen even with two languages that don't have much in common, besides, both of them being Indo-European, like German and Spanish. What I'm trying to say with that is I have mixed languages that are very diverse from each other, and I know people that have done it, and I would bet many of you have also mixed languages that have nothing to do with each other. So of course, if you do Spanish and Portuguese, it's going to happen a little bit more, but not much more. If languages are closely related, that doesn't spell disaster. The reason I mixed German and Spanish was because my German was insufficient, because I didn't have enough practice. And usually mixing practice solves that. And I never worry about mixing languages because I know that with time, when I practice the languages, it's just not going to happen. So if you're worried about that, it doesn't matter. If you want to do French and Italian, go for it. Really, if you mix them, it's going to be because of lack of experience, not because, learning from the same family spells disaster. And then another one that I've heard is know 2, 3, whatever, however many languages at beginner level at once. So usually the advice that is given out is, say you have an upper intermediate Portuguese and beginner Danish. You can do that. But if they're both beginner levels, you can't. Again, from my own experience, I've done it. I've started like both Italian and Portuguese. I started to learn together. They were both at beginner level. And I think that it's not necessarily a problem. The only problem is, if you leave one before you have a language core and then you try to go back to it, and a little bit of that inconsistency can harm you. But if you're serious about both languages and if you study them seriously together, I don't think that there is any cause for concern here. They can both be at the beginner level. You don't need to only, improve an advanced one and study a new one at the beginner level. They can all be at whatever level you might want. So I would love to go into, before we get into the method, of like why it's a good idea, in my opinion, to study multiple languages at the same time. Of course, I'm going to preface that by saying if you want to, because there's no one size fits all in language learning. That is what I believe. I think that there's very few rules that have to be followed by everybody, right? I think the only one that I can think of that is like a golden rule, in my opinion, is that everybody has their own method. There's no one best method, and you should find the one that works for you. So if you couldn't care less about studying multiple at the same time, then don't do it, whatever you like. But if you're thinking about it, I think the benefits are the ways that in which they uplift each other. Say some similarities in grammar or in vocabulary. To use my example from Romance languages, I was studying, I speak 4 to varying degrees, so Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and French. And I'm still studying, French, and it's my worst Romance language right now. But before, I was also studying Portuguese and Italian and all of that together. And it was so helpful for me to have those parallels drawn between the languages. Like you basically learn the subjunctive, for example, once, and then you kind of, you learn that it's a little bit different in Italian than in the other languages, but not too much. So you kind of then really learn the exceptions. I was learning it with a comparative grammar, by the way, from Mikhail Petrunin. I think it's a great one if you're interested. And it was just wonderful how you learn one concept in one language and then you can just apply it to the others and only learn the exceptions. and that just speeds up learning so much. And same thing with grammar. It also happened when I was in school with German and English. There were so many similarities, both in the vocabulary, because a lot of English words have German roots, a lot of them also have Latin roots, but anyways, that was just very helpful. And also the way that English and German work can sometimes be similar, sometimes not, but those points of similarities, they really help languages, help each other, right? They boost each other. I think it also gives you a deeper understanding. So in my case, because I was studying also not just Romance, but I was also studying Greek at the same time, and it was just very useful to understand for me, like a word like problema in Spanish. I never had to wonder like why it's not la problema, but it's el problema, because the root is Greek. And so I understood very well that it's to problema in Greek. It's neuter, of course, it's not feminine. So that was just, those little points. Or in French, when you have the aspirated H, and if you know Germanic languages, you know that most words that have the aspirated H kind of have a Germanic root. So, there's this rule that every French teacher tells you, you kind of have to learn the H row by heart, and when there's a liaison and when there's not. But if you speak German or Swedish, any Germanic language, then it's much easier for you to know the root, and it's much easier for you to make those comparisons. And so if you're studying them one after the other, it's harder to make those comparisons, those vocabulary boosts, grammar boosts. If you study them together, you notice the connections, and that shortens your study time for each language. So I think that for that reason, it's wonderful. Then there's also another concept, and now I'm not sure if that is true for everybody, but it's certainly true for me. I need rest time. Now I'm gonna try to give you a gym comparison, but then again, I could be wrong because I know almost nothing about working out, but still, I have heard, and I think most of us have, that people that are very passionate about the gym, they say that you need a rest day to let your muscles recuperate and all that. I think the same applies for language learning. I remember before, when I left the language for a while, let's say a couple of weeks, and then came back to it, it was just so good. Like somehow, I'd done so much study, and then I didn't do any, and then it kind of rearranged itself in my head. And when I came back, I was shocked that I was able to speak this language much better. Like, for example, it happened with Spanish, with living in Spain and then going out of the country and not speaking Spanish for a month. And when I came back, it was just so much better. So I think that rest time is important with language learning. And if you don't want to kind of, again, waste your rest time and you want to be productive, if you do several languages, if you want to abandon for a little bit one and kind of give it some rest time, you don't have to be left with no language learning. You can learn another in the meantime. So I think that, if you do find that you need a little bit of rest time like me, if you do several at the same time, then it's super nice for that, because you don't have to have, periods where you don't study any language at all. And lastly, but certainly not least, motivation boost. I think that one depends on your personality. My personality is such that I could never study one language at the same time because I would get bored. So not everybody has that problem, but for me, I need this constant variety. And if I don't have several, then I'm going to lose motivation and not study. So if you're like that, it could be useful to study more languages. So the process that I suggest is first to pick a realistic number of languages. And what I mean by realistic is, I think your lifestyle comes into play here. Because not everybody has the same amount of time to learn languages. It's like your job, your kids, friends, your other hobbies, just rest time where you do nothing, etc. Like everybody has a different schedule, so know what you can realistically commit to, and also know your memory style and learning style. So what I mean for that is, to give you an example, is how likely are you to lose a language? Because sometimes people say if you don't use it, you lose it. I don't find that that's true personally for me. Like, I tend to never lose them for some reason. Even when I didn't speak German for 3 years, it was still there. But on the other hand, I forget statistics within 2 weeks. like I could take statistics class every month and I would still not be able to put it in my long-term memory. So really know yourself and know, do you forget languages? Because if you tend to remember other types of things, it's really about what your brain remembers. If you tend to remember languages, great, you have a lot more flexibility and you don't have to be strict with yourself, and you don't have to, start over all the time, and you can leave a language for as long as you want and then come back to it. But if you know that that's not possible for you, then you're going to have to do much more consistent study, and you're going to, as a result, pick fewer number of languages, because there's only so many we can do on a consistent basis. So determine your learning memory style, and then determine your lifestyle, and based on that you can pick, okay, is it going to be 2 at the same time or 5? I think that it's very individual, and there's no right answer about like what's the ideal number. A lot of it is trial and error. Which leads me to the next point. I think that you need to give every language sufficient airtime. Again, that's going to depend on, what the style is, like what you remember, what you don't, all of that. But usually, I think for most of us, it's a very good idea to make sure that we're doing it regularly. So, say, however often you study, say if you study 3 times a week, make sure that you study each language that you're learning 3 times a week. I think that's a good idea. Of course, you can deviate from that, but generally, it minimizes the opportunity, the chance for failure. I also think that the right attitude is very important in this case. So there's just like the myths I went over in the beginning, they've been repeated a lot, and so it's a little bit likely that there's going to be fear in the beginning. That was my case with like Portuguese and Italian. I was a little bit scared to start at the same time because there's, very similar languages. So I think it's good to just remind yourself that let's say this is an experiment. I'm going to do this. I'm going to like leave fear behind, and, it's okay. Just have the right attitude, not being scared that it's going to be terrible because your languages are similar, or they're both at the beginner level, or any of those myths that we discussed. Staying positive. It's a cliche, but for a reason. And then the reward system is, I believe, very important, because with several languages, so if you study one first and then another, you have like 2x the amount of time, right? If you study them both together, like I said, I think they boost each other, so you can have like 1.5x the amount of time. But it's still slower than, just one language. So yes, they boost each other. Yes, you learn them together. You learn two together faster than you would one after the other, but it's still slower than just one. So you're going to be, maybe if you are like me, you're going to need to reward yourself in some way because it's going to be slower. So let's say set some milestone that you can celebrate. Or in my case, I think I did 5 languages at the same time, and it's been so long since I had a win. So in order to give myself a win, I just stopped 4 of them, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna finish Italian. For me, finishing a language means to kind of get it to fluent level, not native like, but kind of fluent. So I was like, I need to focus on this right now because I need to get a win. I need some language to be, off the checklist before I can go with the others. For you, it might be, okay, I need to be able to, write a short story in Japanese. You can dedicate some time to that. Just make sure that you have some rewards along the way, because otherwise, with several languages, of course, it's going to take a little bit longer. So if you're lacking the rewards, it might get a little bit discouraging. Right. I would love to give some tips and tricks, because usually when it's more than one language, of course, it requires more time. So most of those are going to be time-saving tips and tricks. And the way that I like to learn a lot is with movies and TV shows. I think they save a lot of time because, let's be fair, most of us will watch movies and TV shows at least a little bit, even if we're not learning any languages. So I really like to kind of take advantage of that sort of, dead time and that sort of like leisure time for language learning. If let's say that I want to see a show, even if it is an American show, I usually don't watch it in English. like dubbed content is not the best, but I will go ahead and find it dubbed thanks to Language Reactor, a great extension I recommend for Netflix. Or I'm gonna go and find content that was actually created in the language I want to learn. So whatever I find, if I do TV and if I do movies, I have a no English, no Bulgarian rule, unless it's like with my family and they want to watch it in that, like, in, you know, English or Bulgarian, whatever. But usually I try to incorporate with movies and TV shows, because that way it's just so easy, right? Like, you would watch it for entertainment anyways. Why not watch it in another language? Another way that I've done this is with language stacking. This is something that many of us are familiar with. You know, when you learn one language to an intermediate level or above, usually, and you kind of use it to learn another. As for example, say you reach advanced French, and so you buy a French book that is teaching you Chinese. So you can have the instruction in French, which is a foreign language for you, and then pick up a new language that way. Um, yeah, I think it's very self-explanatory. I think most of us know this. So to move on to the next point is integrating the languages in your life. That is something that I do a lot to save time when I'm doing multiple languages, because there are some things that I would do anyways. Like, for example, I like yoga. I'm going to do that anyways. Why not do it in German? Or let's say, for example, there's this book I would love to read, but I'm not going to read it in the original language, for example, if it's English. I'm going to try and find that book in Italian, or, you know, anything like that, anything that is translatable. I'm going to find it in a different language. And that way, you know, things I would have done anyways, taken a course, done some yoga, you know, read a book, or if I wanted to read the news, for example, I'm going to read the news anyways. Why not read them in a language I'm learning? So I think that that saves a lot of time to kind of convert your usual activities in another language. And last but certainly not least, for me, it's very important to have an open mind in this. So the way, like, I found out what works for me, how to do my routine, etc. And that took so many changes. Like, what I did with learning multiple languages at first is like nothing like what I do now. And I have changed my routine so much. I used to do like I used to be a fan of doing like 5 or 6 languages every single day. I found that that doesn't work for me. I just don't like the pressure, because then it makes me feel like it's a chore, like I have to tick a box. That just makes it very unpleasant for me. I like my language learning to feel like a hobby, to feel like I do whatever I feel like, and that makes it pleasurable. And, you know, it depends on the day and how I feel and what I have going on. So I changed that. But you might be the types of person, you know, that loves organization, that loves checking boxes. So for you, something super structured might be great. Um, so I think that it's important to stay open-minded, and if you discover along the way that you're not into structure, you can change. I would say that you should not be married to your routine. You know, kind of date it casually. That is the best thing you can do, I think. I think it's very important to be flexible. I have made so many changes. Like, some of the polyglots I know, they make changes to their routine all the time. So if you see that something doesn't work for you, maybe everything I've said just doesn't work for you, then go ahead and change it. I think when it comes to that kind of you know, experimentation with languages where there's almost no backing from science, for example, because really, you know, there's just so little that it tells us about whether it's a good or a wrong idea. A lot of it will have to be trial and error, because we just, you know, you don't know what works for you until you try it. And so that is something that I believe is very, very important when you do it. Just make sure you make those tweaks. Make sure you do not freak out. The attitude part is very important. Even if you see that something is not working, could potentially harm your language learning, so what? Like, stop it. Try something else. That's the last piece of advice I'd love to give here. So yeah, again, that's where you can find me, and I'll be answering some questions now. Opening the floor for like anything you might want to ask. Right. So it's Mikhail Petrunin. I am not sure if there's anywhere that I can spell this that appears on the screen. Okay, let's see. There it is. Yeah, that's the author, and then it's comparative grammar. Let me find it. It's like comparative grammar of the Romance languages, or something like that. I'll give you like the full title. Just a sec. Comparative grammar of Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and French. Learn and compare 4 languages simultaneously. That is the whole title. He also has other ones. All right, so which languages am I learning at the moment and at what level? So I am learning French at the moment, which is kind of intermediate. I am learning Russian. I am a beginner, but because I think because of my nationality, I understand everything. But in terms of speaking, I'm a beginner at the moment. Also learning German because it's a language that always gets pushed to the side for some reason. I always get distracted with others. So German, I'm perpetually learning it. I'm still intermediate in it. And I have just started Swedish as well. And so I'm a complete beginner in that. All right, so the famous polyglot Luca Comparative associates languages to certain parts of his house. Oh, okay. For example, in the kitchen, he uses one language, in the living room another. So what I think about that? I have never done that. So I think it can be useful to create some sort of associations in your head, for sure. In general, I believe it works in language learning, but I've never tried to associate languages with certain days or certain rooms of my house. I think it usually gets you in the mood faster. So it's kind of believe it can like trick your brain into kind of getting in the mood for a certain language quicker. So I think that there would certainly be a benefit to that, and I'm gonna try it myself. That's neat. Although too bad that in my case I like to learn at my desk, which is like in one house, in one room. But yeah, sounds super helpful. I like it. I love the idea. Have you ever tried to learn a language not from your native on the long run? What are your thoughts about that? So the language stacking, I believe you're asking about, right? If I've tried to learn a language not from my native. Yeah, I believe that's what you mean. Yes, so I have learned almost every language through English. So yeah, for sure. There's very little information you can find in Bulgarian. There's very few books. There's that teach other languages. There's very few online resources. Like one of my favorites, Easy Languages on YouTube. They have subtitles in English, so I constantly learn other languages through English. But then also I learned them through others. Like for example, with Portuguese, I learned some through Spanish because there's so much, Portuguese for Spanish speakers content online. So all the time I don't have a choice but to learn from a foreign language because it's just Bulgarian, there's so little. Do you prefer to practice a certain skill for your language? Listening, writing, speaking, or reading. So do you mean in general, or like if I'm learning several at the same time? I'm not sure I understand the question. So if you'd like, you can ask it again. I'm going to answer to my best understanding. If I have a favorite skill that I like to practice, I love input. So if I have to rank those skills, listening and reading are my favorites. I don't bother with writing much. So I think that when it comes to output, I'm a bigger fan of speaking. Writing is just usually something that I find I need less. So I'm very, very input focused. To give you an example with another famous polyglot, Steve Kaufman, my approach is very similar to his, and I love input. And then like a little bit of speaking, perhaps. But writing is not something I'm a fan of in general. What level do you think is reasonable to achieve when learning multiple languages? I believe it is very personal because it depends on what you want to achieve. I know that some people are very happy if they have A1 in different languages. I know that others are like you need C2. I'm a little bit in between. Usually, I like to get fluent, and by that I mean conversationally fluent, to be able to speak about almost anything. I don't need to be native like. So I don't need to be, for example, the way I'm in English. Sure, you can hear an accent, you're always going to be able to hear that. But in general, I can do things in English that I cannot do in my native language. In my native language, I don't think I can write a research paper. I just don't have that skill, haven't practiced it. So, I can, understand baseball metaphors and like cultural references and all of that, things we haven't lived in the US. I don't need to get to that level in every single language. I just need to get to a level where that's why I like to say fluent, but not native like. That is kind of my definition about when I want to stop learning a language. But that just depends on what everybody wants and what their goals are. Lydia Machova once suggested that you should spend 80% of your language learning time on one language so that you see the most progress and stay motivated. How do you keep motivated without this? Yeah, I usually, the example that I give in the talk with Italian, right? Because when I felt my motivation was dwindling, because I don't always feel it's dwindling. Like for me, it's motivation enough to be able to do several languages. And again, I think it's very important what I was talking about, like what your personality is. My personality is I lose motivation if I do 80% or more on only one language, because I need variety. I need so much variety. So if you're like me, it's like you don't really lose that much motivation when you do several. But the example that I gave before with Italian was like it had been so long that I just needed to get the language to a fluent level. It had been a while, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna stop with my other four languages for a little bit. I'm gonna like do a lot of Italian. I'm gonna see a jump. I'm gonna see progress, and then I'm gonna go back to learning several at the same time. That's what I did, but I don't think that everybody should do that. Maybe you do 80% on one to see motivation. Whatever your rule is. However, it's very, very dependent on the person. What motivates you? For me, it's like I take a break and then I go back. You do your own system. Do you think it's important to have a particular talent for learning multiple languages, or it depends on practice? No, I don't think that you need talent. I think mostly you need the desire to do it. If you don't want to do it, then why would you struggle? But if you want to do it, it depends on how badly you want it, and practice. Of course, practice makes everything easier, of course. That's natural. But no, not necessarily talent. It's just, that I think some people get very frustrated when they learn multiple languages because they have a personality type that's different. Then, okay, don't do it. But if you have the need, the desire, and the practice, then it can be very easy. So, no, it's not about talent. Thanks for the lovely talk. I learned a lot. Thank you for the kind words. So unfortunately, just woke up super tired, but aiming to absorb as much as possible. Any possible way to get a copy of the presentation afterwards? I believe that it's available for a month on this platform. So to my moderator, please let me know if I'm wrong or not. Okay, I can post a link to the slides afterwards. Okay. Let me just check how I can do that. How I can post a link to the slides afterwards. After the talk. Okay. So I'm going to post a link to the slides after the talk, and I believe this is going to be available on the platform to watch as a presentation for a while. And I think that sometimes in the future it's going to be on YouTube eventually. So next question is, do you already know that you'll stop learning languages at some point, or sky is the limit? I will never stop. I don't have a number in my head that I'm like, I'm going to learn X amount of languages and I'm going to stop. It's I need it. I just can't not learn languages, and I'm not harsh on myself. I don't want to tell myself that I want to learn X amount in my lifetime. I don't care how many I learn, but I will always do it. How do you manage your previous languages? Do you do rotations among your languages, or is it totally varying according to your mood, your motivation? I'm a very mood-based person when it comes to language learning, because it's that's a way for me to make sure that it stays a hobby and never feels like a chore. So for sure, it's always mood-based. I mentioned that I don't tend to lose languages for some reason. I am very forgetful about other things I've learned, but not about languages. So I don't really need to do upkeep, but I use them from time to time with, like speaking to other polyglots or music, movies, reading articles, the news, or books. And so very like enjoying my languages. That's what I do. I don't necessarily now that I'm done with studying Spanish, it doesn't mean I never watch anything in Spanish. It just means I'll never consciously study it or try to upkeep it, because I know what I forget, and I know that languages is not one of those things. Would you share top 2, 3 language learning apps, which are super ergonomic, effective, systematic, and include a lot of speaking practice? I adore Babbel, but it just has 5 to 6 languages. I am sorry, I am the wrong person to ask about this, because I'm not a fan of apps. I usually don't like apps that much, because especially when it comes to input-based apps, that's I like to get my input in other ways. But I think it also depends on what your definition of an app is. So I would say that I really like Link, LINGQ. That's Steve Kaufman's website. They also have an app, but it's not really the problem is it doesn't include a lot of speaking practice, which is a part of your question. It's mostly an input-based app, and then I believe there's a lot of bad apps out there that I do not use. But then when it comes to ones with speaking practice, I don't really use many. I know of that, for example, you can talk to other people on italki and stuff like that, but personally, not a very avid user. How would a normal study day look like for me? I do something very different every day. Don't really have a normal one, but for beginner languages in which I'm a beginner, it looks very, very much the same every time, because if I'm an absolute beginner, then I'm gonna do an intro book, and I don't care what intro book it is. I just need like an intro book in the beginning, and then I'm gonna do again, if I'm a beginner, I'm gonna do a little bit of like very easy text that I can read so I can get input. I'm gonna be doing easy languages. I love them, and stuff like that. If I'm more advanced, I could be, like cleaning or something, or brushing my teeth, or doing something like that, and I'll be listening to podcasts. I think that's great. It saves so much time, and you can do it all the time. So listening is very, very useful for me, because every time that I do something that occupies my hands but not my brain, I listen. So I do a lot of that. For me, sometimes a study day can be binge watching a TV show in another language. It's super helpful. So depends what stage I'm with the language, but let's say if I do a beginner level language, it's going to be focused on intro book. If I do a language in which I'm intermediate, it's going to be focused on lots of reading and listening. What do you think of focusing on, starting with pronunciation? The polyglot Gabriel Weiner, who is a singer, always does this and argues that your pronunciation is key to not mixing languages. Yeah, I think that is a good point, because once you get into the correct pronunciation, it's it's a little bit easier to get in the mood for the language, kind of like a little bit similar to the example that was given before about local and pariello, and the different rooms of the house, right? Because you get in that mood. If you speak like a Portuguese person, and if you kind of try to do the accent, you get in that mood, and so your Spanish gets in there less. I agree with that. I think it's a good idea. Usually, it's something that is very important, pronunciation in general, because you might not have a good accent, that doesn't matter, but bad pronunciation can mean that other people don't understand you. So pronunciation is something I work on from day one, but I found that it's not always bulletproof with preventing me from mixing languages. I think the only thing that can prevent me from mixing languages is getting enough practice. How many times a day you're using for language learning? So if you mean what time a day I prefer, I don't have a preferred one. I'm not a morning person, so anything that's not early morning. How many times? Um, if you mean like how many, as in like how many actually times per day I do it, it depends every day. If I have a very busy day, sometimes I will not do anything with language learning. And if I have a day that is like a day off and I'm really feeling it, again, with me, it depends if I'm feeling it, then I could spend hours language learning and I could do it, with like very little breaks. So it's all about what I have going on and how I feel. Do you create your own input for language learning? I do not. No, I'm not sure how to create my own input because, except for like writing some stories in that language, but then I'm doing like output. It's not really, I think you can create input for others. If you're writing something yourself, then it also becomes your output. So I don't really create. I consume a lot of content. What advantages and challenges have you experienced with language stacking? So advantages, I believe it's really great because you're getting reading exposure to the language that you're using to learn another language. You're getting a lot of exposure that way, and so you're able to learn two languages not only at the same time, as in the same time you're learning them together, but also in the exact same moment. So that's amazing. I really like that. I think the advantage is that while you learn something new, like a language in which you're a beginner, you're subconsciously improving one in which you're intermediate. So it's awesome. Challenges. I had a challenge. So it doesn't happen with English anymore because I think in English, but it happens with some other languages in which like my brain has to work harder because I'm not yet fluent, let alone native like. So if I'm intermediate and I do language stacking, it's very tiring for me. That I think is the challenge. It's like because neither of those languages is perfect and they're at the same time. And language stacking can really, really take a lot of brain power that way. So it's tiring and you kind of feel like you need 5 coffees afterwards, I think. Yeah. Do we use music to learn languages? Yes, I do. I think music has helped me a lot because it's connected to emotions and repetitive in a good way. Yeah, and you can sing along and have fun. Yes, I love music. I actually recently made a TikTok about that because I think it's amazing. It's the reason I started to learn Greek, for example. And it's you remember entire phrases by heart, so it's great for chunking, learning in that way, because I'm sure like everybody remembers songs from their childhood by heart. It's just so good with, as you say, emotions, and sticking in your head, and you remember it forever, and then you can use some of those phrases. So yes, I use so much music and I love it, but it's also very dependent because it's like I prefer music in certain languages than others. So I can't do it as much with every language just because, the music taste plays a role here. So it works better for some languages. Language stacking might be a necessity if you're studying minority languages. For example, resources for Okinawan might be only in Japanese. Yeah, I would agree. I haven't had this type of like for me it's not just for minority languages because my native language is super unknown, so it's a necessity for me as well. Yeah, all the time. But I guess if you also for minority languages even more. Absolutely. Okay, well, looks like this is the last question. So thank you very much for listening and for asking your questions. And I'm always available for additional questions like on the channels that I listed. And I would love to continue the discussion. It has been great to participate in my first Polyglot gathering. Thank you.